Those of you who don't know who I am, my name is Paul Karsten. That's my lovely wife, and get the opportunity to share with you this morning. And we've got a couple of things to talk about right off the bat. So, what I'd like to see everybody do is grab that bulletin that you have with all of that great information in it. Pull that out a second. You can stare at it if you want long enough. If you move your eyes, the circle starts spinning and doing all sorts of weird stuff. That's kind of entertaining. You can share that with your kids and your grandkids and all of that. But most importantly, what I'd like you to do is I'd like you to take out the sermon notes. Grab those. Second thing I want you to do is I want you to grab a pen, pencil, whatever, crayon, marker, whatever you got on you, and go right to point number 1. Right between the word will and be. Put a little line there and put the word not. Otherwise, this is not going to make any sense to you, okay? I'm going to take full responsibility for that. I don't know where the error came, but that's on me. But make sure you make that correction. We'll get to that a little bit later on as we talk about the sermon. So life isn't fair. Life isn't just. And the question is how can I avoid being defeated by the truth that in this world I'll have trouble? Notice that the question there doesn't say, how can I avoid trouble? That's not a guarantee at all. But what I'd like you to do this morning, what I'd like you to do right now is to prepare yourself for motion sickness. Most of us at one time or another have experienced motion sickness, whether it was sitting in a car, riding in a plane, being in a ride at an amusement park or a carnival. And I'll tell you, that's one of those things that I'm not really good with. So how many of us have been to Disney World down in Florida? Yeah, number of us. I don't know if they have this ride down in Southern California, but there's a ride called Mission Space at Epcot Center. And there's 2 levels of training that they have. One is the red training, and that's full-on 4-alarm training. And then there's the green training. That's a little easier. Now, I'm standing in a line with 2 guys who are gung-ho for red training. I get motion sick, and I'm claustrophobic on top of it. So I can't wimp out. I got to go. I've got to get in that line. So here I am standing in line. My heart is pounding. Literally, I can just feel it. I've got the cold sweats going on, and I'm not as outgoing and as chipper as I normally can be. And they're probably thinking something's wrong. So, after about 7 or 8 days of standing in line, we finally get into the ride. Okay, because, lines there are forever. They jam me into this little seat. There's 4 of us in here. We got this little screen, and they pull this thing forward and lock you down. And it's dark and enclosed and quiet. I'm not liking this at all. All of a sudden, I'm spinning around. I'm upside down. We're going in and out. I don't know where we're going. Apparently, we're going to the moon or Mars, or I forget what it was. But my friend is realizing just how quiet it got a couple of seats over. Because I'm normally, you guys know me. I talk a lot. That's just what I like to do. And he turns to me and says, dude, don't worry. Nobody ever died of motion sickness. And it took me a little while to return a comment to that. But I said, all I could think of saying at that point was, that's what was keeping me alive. Needless to say, I got off that thing. When it was over, I got off that thing. And I will share right here, right now, that all lunch and all cookies did remain in a fully locked and upright position at that point. But I spent about 2 hours getting over this horrible, nauseated feeling. But what I'd like to do is I'd like to try something with you. I'd like to trick our senses into believing something that really isn't there. We're going to look at a video really quick, a short clip. I want you to focus at the center of the screen. There'll be some letters that come up, and we'll say those letters out loud so we stay focused right on the middle of the screen. And let's take a look at that. that cool? That is really cool. How many of you have experienced motion sickness? I don't get too close to the edge because it's still moving. It takes about 15 seconds. Some of us or all of us at some point have experienced motion sickness, or something's just not right. It's out of sync. It's really unpleasant for me. I love flying, but when the plane is moving around and I have no frame of reference, the joy goes out of it real quick. It goes by a ton of different names. We have travel sickness, we have air sickness, car sickness, sea sickness, and even space sickness. Astronauts get motion sickness as well. They don't have a frame of reference to go off of. This happens when we can't focus on something stationary. Think about when you're in a car reading a book. Don't try this, I don't. You're reading a book and the car is going down the road and up and down the hills and you're focused on the book, which isn't moving. And so your eyes are perceiving one thing. The next thing you notice is that your ears are perceiving something different and it's sensing the motion and they're not in connection with one another. So we have a perception issue there. There's a conflict between reality, that which our inner ear is experiencing, and the false impression of what our eyes are seeing. As a result, we get dizzy, disoriented, nauseated, and it's that different perception of which is not true, the perception of what's not true, and reality which is true, that gives us motion sickness. So, what does this have to do with the Bible? Why would I spend all this time talking about this? This morning, we're going to continue looking at 1 Peter, specifically going to look at the second chapter, the end of the second chapter. But in 1 Peter, Peter is telling us that we are travelers in this world. And it says in 1 Peter 1:17, we need to live our time as foreigners here. And in 1 Peter 2:11, it says that we are indeed aliens and strangers in this land. Now, as we travel through the world, we can get disoriented. We can have perceptions of reality that aren't true. And that is when the conflict arises. We'll end up with a form of spiritual motion sickness. For example, Peter implies that we make this assumption that life should be fair, that life should be just. And just the opposite is true most often. Peter tells us in 2:19 that we will encounter unjust suffering. Straight off the bat. There's no cutting around corners on that one. He goes on in 2:20 to say that in this world we will suffer for doing good. If you're doing great, if you're doing good, keep up the good work. You're going to suffer. Sorry. Now, that doesn't seem right. It frustrates us because we're Christians. We're children of the God Most High, are we not? The all-powerful and mighty creator of the universe. Why are we suffering? Our perception is just that. We shouldn't be suffering. We think, oh, I got connections. I should have it good. But just the opposite is true. Jesus said it like this: in this world, you will have trouble. That's exciting. James tells us, in James 1, 2, and 3, it says, consider it pure joy, my brothers, whenever you face trials of many kinds. Yay. Paul, the Apostle Paul, not me. Everyone who wants to live a godly life in Christ Jesus will be persecuted. I want a relationship with Jesus. I want to pursue him. There's trouble on the way. And Peter, we'll talk about this later on in our study of 1 Peter. Dear friends, do not be surprised at the painful trials you are suffering, as though something strange were happening to you. It's like, really? We should already know this. But the single truth is that if we perceive that all we're going to get in this world is suffering, difficulty, persecution, and hardship, then life will not be easy for us, even though we are Christians. That's your first fill-in right there. That is a truth. Now, I'm not going to put a capital T or a little t on that. That's just a truth that you're going to have. The thing is if we believe that, if that's where we're stuck in our walk, if that's where we're stuck in our daily life, constantly dwelling on this suffering, this perception of difficulty and persecution and hardship, we're just going to become a room full of cynics and fatalists. And our spiritual walk, our faith is going to suffer because of that. We have to be on caution at this point. I want to share a story that I've read, and it's an interesting take on this. This was a Civil War battle reenactment between the North and the South, of course. And in this specific battle, the South ended up losing. And there was one rebel. He was, I don't know if he was ready to be there or not, but it was a hot day. They were dressed in traditional Civil War garb, so it was wool. Heavy wool, the uniforms, the leather straps, all of the gear that they would have. And the heat was just excruciating. Well, this rebel, he was getting a little bit crabby at this point, and he finally just threw down his hat and he started walking away. He was grumbling and complaining. Here's the thing, he was defeated. He had finished. He was just done. He was completely done. And he had accepted the idea that his role didn't matter anyways because they were planning on losing, because that's the way the battle reenactment worked out. But here's the other part of this. He lost the joy of being part of this historical event. And this can happen to us as Christians. If all we focus on in our life is suffering, persecution, hardship, the deception of the world, all of these things that come together, what ends up happening is our relationship with Jesus begins to suffer. We can walk away from Jesus like this one character actor in this battle did. So how do we fix this? How do we get back? How do we put the joy back into our faith? That's your next fill-in. Go back to my opening illustration. How do you deal with motion sickness? How do you fix that? A couple of different sources that I read said that you should fix your eyes on the horizon, that you should get them off of the close-in, whatever's deceiving you, the false perception, and fix your eyes on something, lack of a better word, fixed. Like the horizon. If you're in a car, look down the road. Don't sit here and go like this or look at the dots as they go down the road. Get a wider perspective. The awesome part about this is that the Bible tells us the same thing. In order to lock our view, to fix our eyes on something, to get our focus back, Hebrews 12:2 says it just like this. Let us fix our eyes on Jesus, the author and perfecter of our faith. What an incredible reference point that is. I don't need to look at anything else. There's nowhere else I need to look except right at Jesus, and all of this goes away. The teaching of the Scripture is that about Jesus is that the teaching out of Scripture is that Jesus is the only thing that's going to help us deal with the difficulties of life. And that's what Peter is telling us here. Hear these words that are recorded in 1 Peter 2:21 through 25. It says, "To this you were called because Christ suffered for you, leaving you an example that you should follow in his steps. He committed no sin, and no deceit was found in his mouth. When they hurled their insults at him, he did not retaliate. When he suffered, he made no threats. Instead, he entrusted himself to him who judges justly. He himself bore our sins in his body on the tree, so that when we might die to sin and live for righteousness, by his wounds you have been healed. For you were like sheep going astray, but now you have returned to the shepherd and overseer of your soul. Fix your eyes on Jesus. The thing is he's been where you are. He's been where I am. And fixing our eyes on Jesus will carry us through the tough times in life. It's in the midst of life's difficulties that we need to do this the most. We need to fix our eyes on Jesus right now. Not later, not when it gets really bad, or, wow, it's now extra super bad. I really need to do it now. Do it before it gets bad. We've read and we've seen that we're going to have trouble. Now's the time to look for the solution. Now's the time to look for the way out. And that can only be found in Jesus. But here's the thing, as Christians, we don't do that. We get caught up in the daily life, the daily grind of living. And when the miseries of life get too tough, people mistreat us, bills come due. Yeah, that happens. Or we suffer from an illness, or we know somebody who's suffering from an illness. There's difficulties at work or at home, our marriage. Problem is that right at that point, we get dismayed, we get discouraged, we get frustrated. We can get afraid. Why? Why does this happen? Because for a while, we're disoriented. And we begin to think with the mindset of, I can fix it. I can fix it. We forget all about Jesus. All about him. So what happens is that we're faced with a situation we can't change, we can't fix, we can't help. We go back over it in our head over and over and over, and then we go over it some more. And if you're like me, then you go back over it a little bit more. You start rehashing the details. Could I have changed that? Could I do this? What about that? This is unfair. This is unjust. Look at this stuff that I'm facing. Why is this happening to me? I felt that way. I've even said those things. I'm beginning to learn how to give it to God. This is like a weight being lifted. Have I won victory in this area? Absolutely not. Am I gaining victory in this area? Absolutely 100%, because every step towards the kingdom is a victory. Every step. If I can't fix it, if I can't change it, if I don't have a way to handle the problem, you know what I do with it? I give it to God. I give it to God. God, I can't fix this. I can't handle this. I don't know what to do with this. Can you please do something with this? And I mean that with all respect. With all respect, because God doesn't have to do anything about it. It might be in His plan for me that I go through that trial. We must remember Jesus and fix our eyes on Him. We must remember that He knows exactly what we're going through. He's been there. He's been through worse. He went through worse. Let's take a look at the screen. I'd like to read part of John 16:33 on the screen. And let's read this out loud. It says, "In this world you will have trouble." I want to read it again, but this time I want to take the word you and I want to make it personal. Let's put the word I in that instead. In this world, I will have trouble. Pretty depressing. Wow, I'm really looking forward to that. Can you make it any more clear for me? The thing is Jesus is telling me that life isn't going to be fair. Life is not fair. He's not telling us that it's all going to be a beautiful garden full of roses. But here's the cool part about this right here. Jesus doesn't stop right there. That's not the whole verse, is it? Let's take a look at the whole verse. I'll read this for you. It says, I have told you these things so that in me you may have peace. Wow, we're not even into the bad stuff yet. He's given us the information we need. I'm going to tell you something, and you're going to have peace. In this world, you will have trouble. Okay, if I have to. But take heart. That's an exclamation point in the Bible. The Bible can yell. That would be like the equivalent of cap locks in your text. So that's important. But here it is. Here it is. I have overcome the world. If there is ever an appropriate time to use it, oh my gosh. Right there's the answer. You and I will face difficulties. We will. Guaranteed 100% going to happen. We will suffer. We will have hardship. We will be persecuted. I think I've said that before somewhere. But take heart. I have overcome the world is exactly what Jesus has told us and has promised us. Whatever I have to face, I do not have to face it alone. You do not have to face it alone. I could stuff you in that closet by yourself, and you wouldn't be alone. Jesus would be right there with you. You might not like being in the closet, but guess what? You're never alone. It's awesome. Jesus will never leave us, and he's never going to forsake us. I don't know about you, but that's so cool to know that somebody always has my back. Always. Because people, friends, we can fail at times, can't we? So, your second fill-in. Second fill-in's a big one. Whew. Lots of line. So essentially what the Bible is saying is if you can't handle it, give it to God. Give it to God. I could have put just like the word it to up there and you wouldn't have been as exciting. 1 Peter 5:7, and we're going to get to study that coming up in a little preview. Cast all your anxiety on him because he cares for you. When the world is spinning, when you're under heavy persecution, or guess what? When you don't think that you're under heavy persecution and your government's doing all sorts of weird stuff and, the rules are changing, cast all your anxieties on him. It doesn't say gripe about it to your neighbor. Don't hit social media and complain about it and post some image that's offensive to somebody. It says give it to him. Why? Because he cares for you. He cares for me. Psalm 37, verse 5 and 6, David wrote this. Commit your way to the Lord. Trust in him, and he will do this. He will make your righteous reward shine like the dawn, your vindication like the noonday sun. There's an answer. And I like this one. Psalm 56:3. When I'm afraid, I will trust in you. When I'm afraid of what's going on outside these walls. Fred and I had a weird encounter in the parking lot on Friday. I was afraid. Somewhere in my heart, I was afraid. When I hear about all this stuff going on, I'm glad I'm in the little town of Redmond. Because those big towns, they got that weird stuff going on. But here's the thing. When we're afraid, do we give it to Jesus? Do we turn to God? When we're afraid, do we think about God? When you get spooked, do you think about God? Do we lean on him? Do we trust him? Do we utilize our number one tool, the very important thing that we have, prayer, our connection, our relationship with God? Do we turn to that? Make it personal. Change the we in each one of those statements to I. Do I think about God when I'm afraid? Not always. Do I lean on him? Or can I fix it? I'm a guy. I can fix anything, right? I don't have any tools. Are all packed up. So I can't fix anything right now. Do I trust him? Is he going to do it the way I want it done? When I want it done? Or is it in his time and in his way for my path that he's already got laid out for me? Do I pray when things get spun up? Do I stop and pray? Thing is, this is hard. But if we learn to do it, if we learn to lean on God, that's going to be your anchor point right there. You know, the thing is this world can't slow you down if you turn to God. If you turn to God, the world's not going to slow you down. Okay, you might just get along that path that Jesus has laid out for you a little quicker because that's what he says and that's what he wants. But the world's not going to win. How do we know if we've come to this point in our faith where we can do that, where we can think about, lean, trust, praying to God? I can tell when I've learned to lean on him, when he's gained control over something in my life, when I start being less fearful of that because I know God has it, or I'm less fearful of this situation because God has that, and he's given me peace on that. You know, another area that's really easy for me to gauge whether I have success in this is when I'm able to show respect to people who are harsh to me. That's a hard one. That's really tough. You know, those people that are ridiculous to be around. They're unpleasant. They're unruly. And for me, I'll be driving and somebody will do something. I'll make sure I shake my head just a little bit more so than I would normally do it. You know, I want to show my displeasure for that person. I'm not showing respect in that situation. But that person, they're mean-spirited. They're frustrating. They're hard to be around. Or they've done something I don't like. You know, what's really bad is when those people have authority in my life. That boss, that, really? Again? You asked me to do what? Most people deal with those kind of people by griping and complaining. Guess what? That's gossip when you start sharing it. It's a sin. Guilty. Guilty. We know that's not a good idea. We don't. But there's that old proverb. Now, I'm not talking about Proverbs, the book. I'm talking about, just one of those sayings that we have. We become like the people we spend the most of our time with. So if you surround yourself with negative thinking people that are watching the wrong thing, saying the wrong thing, doing the wrong thing, going the wrong place, guess what? First of all, if you can witness that, you're doing all of that. You're in those places. But if you're here right now and you're surrounding yourself with people who want a closer relationship with God, you can't help yourself but to have a closer relationship with God. You can't help but become the people you associate with. That's basic psychology. And many of you know that I struggle with negativity and sarcasm. It's easy for me to find a sarcastic comment about something, and I've even relegated myself to the fact that it's not sarcastic, it's satirical. See how I did that? There's a big difference. Satire is making fun of something. Being sarcastic is victimizing someone. Be careful which side of that fence you're on. It's easy for me to find the negative thing first. The situation, oh man, instead of, I can see a way around that. I surround myself with people who hold me accountable. It's a protective love. And that I like the way that sounds. Thing is is I'm a Christian. I shouldn't let negative people or those types of situations control me. Now, should I? Who should have control over me? Exactly. Jesus should have full control of your life. So if I can learn to show respect to people who are harsh to me, what does that mean for me? That means that I'm able to prove that I trust God, that I'm leaning on Him. Doesn't mean I have victory. It means I'm moving in the right direction. This verse just tears me up. And Jesus said it just like this in Luke 6:27 through 28. Love your enemies. Really? Do good to those who hate you. What? Bless those who curse you. Okay. Pray for those who mistreat you. Are you kidding me? Yes, sir. Jesus said to do it. That's our response. That's the only correct response to that statement. Love our enemies. As Christians, we think we have this huge batch of problems and enemies. The world, everything outside these walls is against us. It feels like at times. If we show love, if we do good, if we bless those who curse us, and most importantly, if we pray for those that would mistreat us, we're doing the right thing. It matters. Fridays at noon, there's a group that meets and prays over the nation. I don't want to pray for the nation at times. I don't want to pray for the guy in the office, any of them at times. These guys are like screwing up constantly, in my opinion. But we need to be praying. And I heard somebody say it in our life group. I pray that our world leaders would wake up with peace on their heart. Could you imagine? Could you imagine? No, I'm not worried about the money. I'm not worried about the scandal. I'm not worried about the atrocities I'm committing. Today is all about peace. One day would change everything. And prayer works because if one person does it, and another, and another, and then the world is praying for that, I guarantee change will occur. We have that promise. That's our direct connection to God. Prayer is our number one tool. So as I start to wrap up, I want to look at this statement. Spiritual motion sickness occurs when that which I perceive to be true is in conflict with what is actually real. I may perceive that things are unfair. I may perceive that things are unjust. It's my perception. But if I allow that perception to take control of my life, I haven't given it to Jesus. I have not learned to trust God in my life. The only way that we can control spiritual motion sickness, that's that conflict between what we should be doing as Christians and what the world is telling us and our thoughts on what we should be doing, but really they're kind of messed up a little bit, is to let God take control. Let Him take control in my life. Let Him take control in your life. Turn to Jesus. Fix your eyes on Jesus. Let Him have control. He's not going to steer you wrong. You might not go and get that thing you wanted, but you're going to be safe. I read a story of a preacher who was doing a funeral for a man who was a pilot. This man's name was Dave. And he says in the story, the man who died, Dave, had married a lady in the congregation, and they began attending. When the pastor learned that he had never made a commitment to Christ, he asked him if he would like to begin learning the word together. He agreed, and after time, this preacher had the opportunity to baptize Dave. On one of the visits to Dave's home, his wife had taken him out to this tool shed, to the shop that he had been working in. And one of the projects that he had been working on was an airplane. It was a small plane, little wing underneath, couple of seats. It was meticulous in every detail. Everything was by the book. Because the thing is if you didn't do it by the book, it could cost you your life. Anybody who's flown or knows anything about flying know that there's a checklist to go through before you get off the ground. And the pastor visited with his wife and daughters and preparing for the funeral. And he had confirmed that. He had always gone through this checklist. He made sure everything was working properly. He never took any chances with regard to this. His daughters told him that when Dave would take them flying, he would allow them to take the wheel. And after a while, when they got comfortable with flying and handling the plane, he even taught them how to do loops. Talk about motion sickness. I'm not sure I could be doing that. But that wasn't really by the book, now was it? And so the pastor asked, did your father really take his hands off the wheel? And they both looked at each other and said, no. I was sitting in the front seat flying, but my dad, my father, was in the back with his hands firmly on the wheel. His daughters felt as if they were flying, as if they were in control. But their father, our Father, is in control. He has his hands on the wheel. I want to leave you with this thought. If God is your co-pilot, we've all seen that crazy bumper sticker. If God is your co-pilot, switch seats. Do it now. That's where you need to be. If you'd stand with me, I'd pray for us today.